Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist, Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, welcome back into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts, and it's time to put the system on trial. No,
that's right.
The U.S. retirement system on the global
stage. What's our grade?
Yeah. We're going to do, I was thinking, as soon as it hit me, I was thinking about the Al Pacino. I'm going to put the whole system on trial, right? Was that Dog Day Afternoon, maybe, I think?
Yeah, I think something like that. Yeah.
Attica. Well, anyway, we're going to talk about the U.S. retirement system on the global stage and where does it rank? So there's this thing called the Mercer Index, Mercer CFA Institute Global Pension Index. Say that 3 times fast.
Yeah, that's right. It's a mouthful.
Yeah, and they did a little survey in 23, Phil, as you know, because you've got the data we're going to look at. We're going to talk about that with folks today on how the countries rank. So it's 47 countries in this thing and where they rank in their retirement system and how their retirement system works for their populace, right? So today's episode, we're going to kind of talk through some of these things. And I really liked, you and I had a little conversation prior to getting started on, there's a lot of data. So how do we kind of keep this, compact a little bit? It's really, think about it like choices. It really comes down to choices. So we're going to go through some of the data, give you guys some of the information, but then Phil had a really good take on this. And it's like, okay, you could have more of this, but you give up choices, right? So just like anything in life, especially in Americans, we like our choices. So
right. Yep.
That's going to be the conversation this week. We'll get into it. So there's a lot to do. So you doing all right though?
Doing good.
Yeah.
Doing good. Starting the new year off good. So
good. Rocking and rolling off to a good start is always a good thing. So let's jump in and get here going. So where does the U.S. stand? We're 22nd among the 47 countries. And you might first hear that and go, well, why so low? Phil, your point
I know,
was...
that's kind of where it hit me in the beginning. It's like, wait a minute, we scored a C.
Yeah, we're so developed and we have all the money. And everybody needs us to, borrow money from us, which we don't have. But that's another conversation. Right. But so why are we so low, right? So, we're going to analyze some of this stuff and look at some of this. So let me do the setup for folks, Phil.
Sure.
The Mercer Index measured the success of each country's retirement system based on 3 main categories. What were the 3?
So they're going to be adequacy, sustainability, and an integrity.
Okay. So adequacy was
kind of rate or areas that they rank it on.
Yeah. So adequacy was how much do retirees receive relative to working wages in the country? Sustainability was can the system weather demographic change and financial challenges? And then integrity was are the system's private providers well regulated and trustworthy? So the 3 big dogs, or 4 big dogs, was the Netherlands, Iceland, Denmark, and Israel. They all got grade A's, which scored a 80 or higher on a 100-point scale. And to your point, we got a C+. So we got a 63.
Yeah. So we're at a 63, which again, at the beginning kind of struck me odd. It's like, well, wait a minute, how in the world can we be at a 63? I mean, the funny thing is you start to look at this, we're at 63.9 or 63 this year, 63.9 last year. So they do this every year.
Went down a little bit.
So we've actually, we dipped a little bit this year. But 63.1 is the average of all 47. So we're right
in the middle.
And it's pretty consistent along each one of these 3 areas. So adequacy, we're at a 67, call it, rounded up. Sustainability is 61 and integrity is 60.
Okay.
So, I mean, we're kind of right in the middle.
So we were consistent.
Round. So, right.
Right.
Yep. So there's no one of them that was just really low or really high that kind of brought that average out.
Now we love as Americans to be like, we're number one. We want to win in the Olympics.
Right. Why aren't we number one?
Right.
What's going on?
But in this context, and I like the way you framed this when we were talking through the setup on this, is that the trade-offs may not be necessarily worthwhile for being number one. Now there's some good points, and there's some good points as to why the improvements can be made. So we'll dive into that a little bit. But basically, think about it as a conversation about our Social Security system.
And I was going to say, maybe we should kind of clarify a little bit when we talk about the quote unquote, the pension studies. So people think of it as a pension. Well, no, we're talking about general retirement income. So I mean, this is talking about public. So our Social Security system,
that
kind of
they call it pension in other countries, but I mean, our Social Security is a pension system.
Effectively, right.
Yeah.
But what this study looks at is that the public side of it. It also looks at private pensions. and it looks at then personal savings, defined contributions, what you're contributing. So
Yeah.
those are the three components that they're looking at when they are ranking each one of these countries for those three areas.
Okay. Well, the article highlights the U.S. retirement system some positive features, but also says it has some major risks and some shortcomings. Well, I think we all kind of can probably agree to that a little bit.
Right.
Where financial planning is largely the personal responsibility, to the point we've been saying this for a while. We obviously it's changed a lot in the last 50 years. You've got to fund more of your own retirement. So first and foremost, do you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and that is one of, as we get into it, you'll see one of the major differences between us and the leaders is the personal responsibility. So I mean, there is much more personal responsibility in planning for retirement in the U.S., which then you have to decide, for yourself, is that good or bad?
And the trade-offs could be maybe not. Well, the trade-offs I think right now are something that we're not keen on. The newer generation, they seem to be. Older generations seem to not be. But what recommendations do you have for individuals without, kind of guaranteed income from workplace pensions? So again, if you're no longer have a pension, which many American companies don't have anymore, you do have to fund yourself. So what's the recommendation? You got to save more, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, in that little snippet you were reading there just a few minutes ago kind of is key, because it talks about that personal responsibility and planning, financial planning.
Right.
And that has to be at the core of retirement in the US. Because you have that personal responsibility, you're going to get out of retirement what you put into it. So you better go into it knowing that up front.
Right.
Have a plan.
But
How
you have
does
the
this
choice.
work for me?
Right.
But you have the choice.
Yeah.
Versus a lot of these other countries, it's not as much personal responsibility. So they're, having that quote unquote plan isn't as key as it is in the US. And this is something that, you mentioned early on, and we've talked about this many times in the podcast. It's been a gradual shift, over the years where there's more personal responsibility in the US today.
Right.
Than there was even for, one or two generations prior, where kind of the main two pillars of retirement were the Social Security system and some kind of a pension, a public
from the job
pension, right, or a private pension from the job.
And so one of the things you and I were talking about was in some of these the leader countries on this study, they have mandatory personal side, right? So they have to put money in. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at, so as I started to dig into this, it's like, okay, well, what's the difference, right? Why are these countries that are scoring 80 and above at that rank, from a scoring standpoint in retirement income? And if you start to dig into it, you'll see some commonalities. So for instance, Denmark, 81.3. So Denmark's retirement income system comprises of a public-based pension, means tested. So there's a major difference. So public-based pension, meaning kind of like our Social Security.
Sure, it's like our Social Security, right?
But one of the main differences is theirs is means tested. So ours is not.
Right.
So
and they've been floating that for years, talking about it here, but they haven't done it yet.
They haven't done anything with it. Now, those that make more do pay more tax on their Social Security, but it does not reduce their Social Security. And there is a cap on how much Social Security you get. So, if the higher income earners don't get a proportionally higher Social Security benefit. Just the way the formula works. I mean, if you're making, $300,000 a year, it's not like you're going to have, 10 times the person making 30. It's
well,
not that
you always
way.
think you always think somebody like Oprah. You're like, wait,
right? Well, she's got to have like
$100 billion.
Like,
does she even put into it? And does she? But she's entitled to Social Security. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Everyone in the U.S. is entitled to it. If you've paid into it.
The 10 quarters, right? Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it's a much different system.
Yeah.
40 quarters.
40 quarters. 10 years.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, keep going.
So, I mean, that's one of the main differences is, theirs is heavily weighted in that public pension, means tested, fully funded defined contribution scheme providing lifelong pensions. So, I mean, there's going to be another one. So it sounds like their defined contribution is kind of pushing more towards the annuity side, right? Where they're forcing people into not having this pool of money that they have choices of how they spend it. it more is a income stream, similar to like a Social Security.
Hmm.
And it's mandatory that you contribute,
Right. And right now
so
we're still
that
optional.
we're optional, so, and we've taken steps through like the Secure Act 1 and 2, where they're starting to, and it's still not forced, but it's going to be where now as a new 401k plan, you get put into the plan unless you opt out, right? So I mean, it's not
Right.
like you have to do it,
Right.
but if you do nothing, well, they're going to put you in it, and they're going to start increasing your contribution each year.
But that little difference, Phil, right? That little difference
Right.
makes, to me, that makes all the difference
Oh,
in our
absolutely.
personal freedoms. Yes, we need to prepare better to be retired. We talk about this all the time because we do a terrible
Yes.
job at it. However, forcing anything, I think, down on anybody, it's just never the right way to go, in my opinion, just simply
Right.
because it eliminates that uniqueness of some situation that might pop up where it just totally railroads you, right? So you and I were talking about the Secure Act 2.0, and we were talking about like something as simple as the taxes. It used to be if you didn't pay your RMDs, right? If you didn't do your RMDs, it was a 50% penalty, right? That's
Right.
hefty. Like if you had to
Yeah.
pull $30,000 out of an RMD and you didn't get it done, 50% penalty. That was that high to make you go, duh, get it done.
Right. Yeah.
And by
Yeah.
lowering it, they've almost made it like there's less accountability, which I think is the one place where we need to change. We need more accountability, not less.
Right. I mean, and that's just human nature. Where there's choice,
Laziness
you're
comes
gonna
in.
you're gonna have some people that take that choice and thrive with it, right? I mean, it just by their nature, they do great with that, and they have planned well for retirement. They've thought this out. They've not spent as much as they could all their working years, knowing that at some point the responsibilities on them, and have saved for retirement.
Right.
Others, that's just not in their nature to be able to handle that personal responsibility, and they haven't prepared as well. They haven't saved as much. And again, they say that's where you start to compare us to some of these other countries and say, okay, well, I feel bad for that person that isn't as prepared for retirement as they should have.
And it's a slippery slope to have this conversation, right? Because you could
Yes.
easily walk into are you not responsible, smart enough, whatever term you want to put to it, to manage your own life and your own future? And more countries are saying we
Exactly.
don't know, we trust our populace to do it, so we're going to make them do it, right?
Right. And from a country standpoint, it's kind of a slippery slope too, because so what happens with people that haven't prepared well,
Sure.
right? So now they're in retirement, they're old aged, they can't earn anymore. They have Social Security, it's not enough. Who's taking care of them? So I think from a country standpoint, some of this, it's one of those balances, right? It's tough. Where do you go with it? Where do you just say, hey, that's a choice? I'm sorry, but this is, sleep in the bed you've made, so to speak, as it was always, told to me growing up. It's
Right,
like, hey, it
right.
was a choice you made. This is the consequence of those choices.
Right. And we're struggling with that as obviously as
So,
a society and
oh, we are
about a million, well,
absolutely,
globally, right? All societies right now,
yeah,
we're going through we're going through some sort of a social change where personal accountability and choice seems to be, it's like, well, you
getting,
can make any
yeah,
choice you want, but it's not your fault that you made a bad choice and now have bad consequences. We're in this weird spot with that, right? And so,
right.
and I want to try to not get too political or
Yeah,
whatever.
to
Keep it
down that rabbit
financial, but
hole with it,
it still
but I mean,
fits.
that's the reality of it. It's anytime you talk about this is, they talk about means testing. So basically, the old Robin Hood, right? Taken from the rich, given to the poor is what they're talking about. Means testing, meaning that, hey, you've had a higher earning income, and why? Well, maybe you were self-employed, or did the extra work to become a whatever career that had a
Sure.
higher earning, whatever it is,
Right.
but that's the choice and sacrifices you've made to get there to have that earnings, but now you don't get the benefit from that, and that has to be means tested and help support those that are at a lower earnings. And there's some people in those lower earnings that's not necessarily maybe a choice, it's just where they're at.
Right,
Right.
right.
And, say again, to your point, I mean, that's a slippery slope to get
There's a
down of.
fine balance of how we want to, like, how do we
Right.
help others, but also how do we not coddle others to the point
Right.
where, a percentage does all the work and another percentage does nothing and still gets taken care of. And
Right.
so it's definitely a slippery slope. And I think that's, if you look at these four countries that are leaders, they're definitely a lot more socialist policies than we have here
Absolutely.
in the US. But there is a few places where tweaks could be improved, I think, to kind of find that, hopefully have that happy medium of taking care of folks, but also at the same time, not penalizing those folks who worked really hard.
Yeah, and that to your point, I mean, so with these, if you look at those top four, those are the similarities you're going to start to see, right? It's public pension is very prevalent, means tested in all four of them. There's defined contributions, but I think 3 out of the 4 was mandatory.
Right.
So it comes down to choice. There's not as much choice. And if you think about, okay, public pension, all these different things, well, how does that get funded? Well, it's not free.
Right. Sure.
So there's going to be higher taxes to pay for that.
Right. And if you think about some of these countries, they have very high tax rates.
Right. And as you go through this, so they've gone through this analysis on all 47 countries, and then they give recommendations. Well, how could you make it better? So here are their recommendations for the U.S. at a 63. So number one, raising the minimum pension for low-income pensioners. Okay, so I mean that really comes back to that means testing is effectively they're, that lower end. How do you kind of balance this out so there's not such a disparity? And that's again, you have to think personally, is that something you think we should do? Should we get into that more socialistic type of scenario? If you're on that upper end, you've worked hard, you've built your satisfying retirement, are you willing to give up to help pay for somebody on the lower end? That's a tough call.
Oh yeah.
Where do you go?
But that's one suggestion for improvement.
Yeah. Right. That's one suggestion. Another one is vesting benefits for all plan members, maintaining a real value retained throughout retirement. So what they're getting at here is a lot of defined contribution plans might have a vesting schedule, right? Where, you've got to be there for a certain number of years. So again, they're starting to take away some choices. And I get it from an employer standpoint that the vesting schedules are meant to help secure employment, right? You're going to give
we have seen massive change, right? Yeah, we've seen massive change of people just changing jobs left and right. So, I mean, we did the same thing as a company. We were like, do we put a minimum on there or do we give it right away? Right. So many companies go through that conversation piece.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can see it from an employee standpoint is that, hey, I worked there. It was my benefit. Why do I not get to keep it? But yet I can see it from the employer standpoint too, of they've invested a lot to get you there, get you up and running.
Right. You worked here 1 year.
These are benefits for, exactly for the person that we've invested in. And if you're going to take that and leave in a year, we're trying to encourage people to stay longer. And again, this is just that shift of the workforce. I mean, a lot of the retirees I work with, and it's becoming fewer and fewer, they've had 1, maybe 2 jobs their entire career.
Right.
You talk to many in the workforce today, and what are you talking about? I've had, in the last 5 years, I've had 3.
Right.
So it's
and
every different mind shift of how
everything
works,
changes. So. I mean, even to this conversation. Right. So and that's where we do have to make some changes to help some things because the world and the populace changes, but it has to be, I think, very finely adjusted. I think sometimes when we go at things, when our leaders or society goes at things with big, swath cutting something, it's like that we don't react well. Like humans don't react well to massive changes at one time. So you need to make these little tweaks to try to improve some things here and there so that it doesn't kind of set off too many alarms, I suppose, or too many bells and get you rebelling against something that might be a good idea. Like you said, there were a couple suggestions that you saw on there that actually seemed like they had, some merit, but then some of the other ones, maybe not. And it's the ones with not that people go, absolutely not. We're not doing that.
I'm not doing this. Yeah.
But there's like, let's look at a couple of the merit ones, right?
Yeah. One of them that has good merit is they're talking about reducing pre-retirement leakage, from these retirement accounts. So you basically taking money out of a retirement account before you retired.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which, I mean, that's where the old 10% penalty was in play, and it
Right.
made sense. Hey, you take it prior to 59 and a half, there's
Yeah.
a 10% penalty in addition to tax.
Yeah, we talk about that all the
So
time. It's
that,
like if you have to
right.
borrow money to do something, and the last place you should get it from is taking it out of one of your retirement accounts. Like it's the dead last place you should
Right.
access.
Yeah,
But you
because
still
of
could.
taxes and penalties. You
You do
could.
have
It's a
that choice right
choice.
now. So
Yeah.
that one suggestion is saying, hey, just remove that choice. You can't touch it.
Right. Or they're saying reduce the leakage,
Oh,
but
okay. Maybe
unfortunately
increase the penalty.
we've gone in the opposite direction of reducing that penalty,
True. True.
so it's one of those things. Okay, well, choice comes with consequences, so I kind of agree with this of discouraging, leave it at a choice, but just highly discourage it. I never had a problem with the 10% penalty,
Right.
because if it is really for retirement, for the person saving for retirement with that view in mind, it's not a problem. Why? I would never touch it anyways. For those that maybe don't have that's just not their mindset, it's easier to help discourage that behavior by having this kind of penalty in place. So, I mean, that's
Okay.
one of their suggestions.
Yeah.
And then they're talking about introducing a concept of basically forcing you to take retirement income as an income stream versus, here's your 401k, you've saved, that's great,
Mm-hmm.
but you get to take it all.
Oh, okay.
So kind of changing that structure of the defined contribution to be not just a big bucket of money that you then figure out how you're going to, right, how you're going to make this turn into income in retirement, because the challenge there, again, for somebody that maybe doesn't have the bigger picture and a plan in place, is that, the wealth mentality of, hey, I've retired, I've saved $1 million, and I've always wanted that, 40-foot boat.
Right.
So we're going to go out and buy, all these different
You're
things.
You're going to pull a lump amount to go do something
gone.
versus that doled out a certain amount.
Right. Versus forcing people that have saved, now you don't get this lump sum. It's more of an income stream.
And I can hear people right now going, absolutely
it's
not.
It's my money. I saved it.
Absolutely. Right. And so that's where, and again, that's where we get into that slippery slope. I think humans, certainly Americans, but humans in general, we just want to have options. We just want to have some choices. Right. But there are people who do need to be led by the hand to get where they need to go, right? So that they can be taken care of. So it's interesting. So maybe being, I know we're getting a little long. I don't want to go too crazy long, but maybe being middle across the board in this instance is not necessarily the worst thing.
Well, that's why I kind of hinted in the beginning it hits us wrong in the beginning, as we're the U.S. Why aren't we on the top?
We're number one.
And it's, when I looked at it, it's like, wait a minute, why? That doesn't make any sense. But you start to dig into it, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm okay with being middle. Knowing where we're at, and knowing, it's a matter of choice versus being forced. So yeah, it's just an interesting concept, something to kind of make you maybe appreciate the U.S. as a retirement system.
It has its problems.
Limitations.
It has its problems,
like
right?
everything,
like
does.
Every other country, and these other countries have their problems too.
They've got their problems, right? I mean, it's not rosy there either, but there's always a pro and con to every single decision, and that's the pro and the con in the U.S. To me, I think having that middle ground, at least we have more of a balance of, there is that base, right? We have Social Security. Everyone's going to get Social Security if you've worked. So there is a base minimum income, although it's pretty minimum, if you haven't had a higher earning. So, yeah.
Well, I think, humans in general, right? Like nothing's easy. You know what I mean? And the things that we put in place and so on and so forth, no matter what walk of life you're talking about, nothing's easy. And you're never going to get utopia. You're never going to get perfection in anything. You could just think about exercising or whatever it is that you do. There's always going to be nothing's ever perfect, right? So you have to kind of find, maybe sometimes middle ground is not the worst place to be, right? Anything too far one direction or too far the other tends to not work out good in the long term. A lot of times I think finding a middle ground works best especially when you're talking about larger groups of people. And certainly when you're talking about a retirement system, that's a large group of people. So a little controversial this week for us.
Coming into the new year, it's kind of an interesting take on it, bringing in diet. I mean, so in the U.S., we've got that choice, right? Unfortunately, we'd all love to have the Arnold Schwarzenegger body of, this big
Absolutely.
buff and eat all the cupcakes and donuts and, whatever you'd like to do. But
You'd like to have
not
both.
reality.
Yeah, you want to be built like
have
Arnold,
both, so.
right? But you want to have all the cupcakes, and so you can't. You got to have the choice. And
Right.
do you have the dedication to make yourself be built like Arnold? Most of us don't. Less than 1% or less than 1% of 1% probably really do that, right?
But most people are somewhere in that middle where, they're going to have a balance of, I like the sweets a little bit, but I know it's too much. So I'm going to, so it's that balance of handling it. But there are going to be people on both extremes that some just do really well with this and they're the 1% that just take off and go. There's others that don't have as much control on the sweet side and they overeat with it. And it's, so it's,
exactly.
It's part of choice.
Humans, I mean, life is fun. We actually raised our daughter that way. We told her since the beginning of her comprehension was life is full of choices. Make one.
It is.
Make one. Yep. Right. Just make one. Whatever it happens to be, but doing nothing is definitely
a choice.
It's a choice. And it's usually more problematic than making one. Right. You may make the wrong one, but then you could work towards fixing that choice as well. We all make wrong decisions. We all make
wrong decisions. It's a matter with what you do with that wrong choice, right? You make a wrong choice. Okay. Don't get down with it.
Fix it.
Understand. Hey, it was wrong. What do we do to fix it? What do we do to make it better next time? So,
well, that's part of the fun of I think life too, is growing and learning. And
that didn't work.
Yeah. I mean, you even get into the conversation, people get in the conversation, things like we joke all the time. And what you do is that if we came with a stamp on us that said when we were going to expire, you'd be able to build a perfect plan for every single person that you see, because you'd know exactly the final time to get stuff done. And people have a fun, they go, would I want to know that? Do I, but I think one of the things
people would say, no, I don't think so.
Well, because one of the things that makes, truly makes life beautiful is the fact that there's an end date.
Yes.
You should stop and appreciate the things that are happening, because at some point,
it's not going to be there.
You won't be here anymore, right?
Yeah.
To appreciate them. So, fairly deep for us this week here on.
Yeah, it is a little bit different than normal.
A little bit different than normal, but interesting study for sure. So, always good to find these interesting kind of things. We'll put a link to the Mercer CFA Institute Global Pension Index. We'll put a link to that in the show notes for people who might want to dive into some of those numbers and check it out for themselves.
So if you're having a hard time sleeping one night, it's 144 pages. Dig in.
There you go. Exactly. We'll put it in the show notes, so if you guys want to check it out, you can. Thanks for hanging out with us here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. It's all about choices. So if you need some help, get some help. You got choices to do so. There's all kinds of advisors all over the country, wherever you live. Talk with somebody. Make sure that you're having a conversation. Talk with a couple of somebodies. Find the right person for you to help you get to and through your retirement journey. But the takeaway is definitely the onus is on us. We've known that for years. So plan, have a conversation. And if you need some help, Phil helps people all around the country as well, not just in his home area of Michigan. So reach out to him, 248-888-7530, 248-888-7530, or you can just stop by philstaxhacks.com. My friend, thanks for hanging out, buddy.
Thanks.
I'll see you next week right here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts.
Phil?
Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objective.